السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسوله أفضل الأنبياء والمرسلين. Welcome everyone to the 8th and last episode of Deen Talks about this topic, the topic that's related to mental health therapy. This show or these presentations are brought to you by the Islamic Center of Yorba Linda, Islamic Shore Council of Southern California, and Qazizada Foundation. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you all found it beneficial, and inshallah you'll find this last episode also very beneficial, as it's very, very important, crucial for us to understand the topic of this session today and how we should be dealing with it and handling it. Inshallah, if la samahallah, if God forbid, we have to go through it. Tonight we are very honored and pleased to have with us Dr. Lamba Aziz-Hanifzai. Dr. Lamba is a PhD in psychology and marriage therapy from University of Aligned. She had her bachelor degree from the University of San Diego, and she is fortunate to be married to our brother Wali Hanifzai, inshallah, or he's fortunate, mashallah. They're blessed with a beautiful baby recently. That's adorable. So we are here with Dr. Lamba, and inshallah you will find the topic of today is very, very important for us to understand it and know how to deal with it. The word crisis in English translates to Arabic to musibah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Those who are afflicted with a calamity or a crisis, they go back and say, we belong to God, and to God we shall return. That's one of the ways that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us how to deal if you are going through a calamity or a crisis or a problem. But also Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنْتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of knowledge if you don't know the answer. And that applies to any field of medicine or science or physics or anything. So we have people of specialty and expertise with us tonight. And we want to talk about crisis in general. And we want to talk specifically about one of the crises, which is suicide. Unfortunately, in the past several years, we've been hearing more young Muslims dying from suicide. And we do have in our community a little stigma about suicide. We don't know how to deal with it properly. We don't know how to deal with it according to the fiqh and the jurisprudence of Islam. So let us start talking about crisis in general, and then we dig deeper into suicide and how we handle it from an Islamic perspective and from a psychological or mental health perspective, inshallah. So without any delay, Dr. Lamba, thank you very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am so excited to be here. I am very excited about having conversation around this topic as well, because it is one that's very close to my heart. I've done, crisis work for many, many years, and I have seen a lot of individuals from our own community going through crisis. So I want to make sure that we raise awareness, and that whatever you learn here today, you spread with your own friends and family, so we can become more aware of this topic. Thank you for Dr. Soboh for having me, and thank you to the Islamic Center of Yorba Linda and Shore Council.
Thank you very much. So let us start with a general definition. When you, as a therapist, as a professional, you hear the word crisis, when you went to school and you got this word, what does it mean to you? Because for the average person, it means a little bit different. But for you, from a professional perspective, what does the word crisis mean, and how do you see it?
So for me...
And if you can just lift the mic a little bit.
Sure, I can actually hold it too, if that's better. So for majority of therapists as well as me, crisis can actually be anything. Crisis can look so different for each individual person. In general, crisis is a situation where you experience a difficulty in your life and you do not know how to respond to that difficulty. You might freeze, you might panic, you might start crying, but you don't know what kind of decision to make in regards to that difficulty. So for example, some people might say, oh no, I failed an exam and now I can't pass this class and this is a crisis for me. My parents are going to be so upset, they're going to be so disappointed. I do not know how to face them, and they start panicking and crying and not knowing how to deal with that situation. Sometimes you'll see couples and somebody will come forward and say, I cheated on my wife or I cheated on my husband, and that's a crisis for them. Other times what we will see is also suicide, right? An individual who's having depressive thoughts, suicidal thoughts, they're experiencing a sense of crisis. Sometimes we'll see individuals who are hearing voices for the first time, and these voices are telling them, things about their families. Don't trust your family. People are following you. People are watching you, and they're the only person hearing this voice. The rest of the people around them are not, and that can be a situation of crisis as well.
Okay. So it could be many things. How common is it? Do you think out of 10 people in the community, how many people you think they will go through a crisis every few years or in their lifetime?
I would be very surprised if a person did not go through a crisis at least once in their life.
So it's very common.
Very common. Yeah. Experiencing crisis is a very normal thing to experience in your life. And like I said, crisis can be anything. I was making a joke with Dr. Soboh earlier and saying, if my baby cries right now with my husband, he's going to experience a crisis. When I used to work with kids, I remember they would come in and say, I had a crisis today. And I would say, what was your crisis? I didn't know what to wear to school today. Right? So a crisis could be as small as that. In their mind, it's something that they could possibly panic about. So it's very, very normal.
And is dealing with it and responding to a crisis. Let's focus more on the serious crisis, the major stuff. Someone lost a father or a mother, lost a child, right? Losing a child is a major crisis. Going through divorce, God forbid, getting fired from your job, right? These kinds of crises that are kind of a serious more than do my pants match my shirts, right? Depends on the person, of course. But let us talk about this, especially that we're seeing a lot of death taking place nowadays, right? You go to your WhatsApp, go to any social media, you'll see a lot of people being killed in Gaza and in other parts of the world. And it's important for us to deal with that. So what would be a wrong way to face a crisis? What would be a wrong way to respond to a crisis?
So there's no one way responding to a crisis. And you might have to clarify wrong, because usually when people are experiencing a crisis, they're not thinking right or wrong, right? Because they're in that moment of almost being in a frozen state of not knowing what to do next, and whatever decision they make, right, might feel right for them in that moment. We as professionals will then look at it and say, oh no, this was not a good decision, right? So to kind of answer that question, right, some individuals might experience a crisis and lose hope. And a lot of times right now, especially in the Gaza situation, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing a lot of individuals losing hope for the situation. And so this is where we step in as therapists or as family members and friends and try to instill that hope and say, hey, things can get better. We just have to talk about it. Don't lose hope. Don't lose sleep over it. Don't starve yourself. And if you're starting to have thoughts of suicide, let's talk about it, because we want to make sure we guide them to the right path.
So losing hope would be one of the things as a therapist you'll tell people, no, don't do it. Yeah. What if they start harming others or take it on their families? Like, let's say a father lost his job and then he started getting violent with his wife or with his children. How do you see that?
Yeah, so we see that quite a lot, whether it's a father, a mother, anyone who's experiencing that. We always recommend to come in for therapy, because that's a lot of pressure, right? Especially if you're a single income home and all of that responsibility is on you. When you lose your job, you don't know how to react. Sometimes haven't grown up in a space where you have been taught a healthy way of expressing your emotions. And so most of the time, expressing emotions can come out as anger. it's very hard for many individuals to be very vulnerable and say, I'm scared, I'm sad, I'm worried. And so we definitely recommend, coming to these workshops, learning about, expressing your emotions, learning about normalizing emotions, and then definitely recommending therapy to discuss all of this.
Okay, so hopelessness, anger, or violence, would someone, is there a term, retreat, like they go get isolated, stay on their own? I don't know what's the scientific term for that, or if you
isolating.
Isolating. Yeah. Okay, so that's also, in your perspective, is a wrong way to deal with a crisis?
Yeah, so isolating isn't going to really help the situation. It's not going to resolve the situation, right? Because then the people around you do not really know what's going on with you. And when they don't know what's happening with you, it's less likely that they'll be able to reach out to you and help you.
Okay. And what about becoming more pessimistic, becoming more negative? You got a divorce, now you don't trust any woman, or you don't trust any man later on. That's another way of seeing it.
Yeah, and so something that we label that as is black and white thinking, right? If you experience a negative situation, then you look at all situations as negative. You no longer see any positive in the people around you and the experiences that you're having. You no longer have trust for those experiences.
Okay. So that is so what do you do to avoid, like I know you said come to therapy, but let's say we're not going to have a therapy session here. So what is your goal, and how do you help someone who faced a crisis from not doing any of these 4 reactions: hopelessness, violence, isolation, and you said black or white, or black or white thinking? Okay. So what do you do when you're sitting down with someone, or if you want to give advice, someone doesn't want to come for therapy, what would you advise them to avoid these things?
So let's say I have a friend and they're having suicidal thoughts, right? Or they're experiencing any of these things that we just described. The first thing I would do is I would just talk to them and ask them, are you having, anger outbursts? What's happening with you, right? Just starting conversation, creating that human connection with that individual to help them feel comfortable talking to you, right? You don't have to be a therapist. You could be just a friend. Just describing like, I've been like yelling a lot. I don't know what's going on. I can't control my temper. As a friend, I could just give them other options. Oh, okay, so when you're angry, can you go outside to kind of steam off instead of yelling at your partner or your family members? Can you go for an exercise? Can you go for a drive? So having those kind of conversations with that individual, trying to find other solutions for them. But the best thing is just opening up that conversation.
Okay. So if someone is not a therapist, like my wife or my son had crisis, and they don't want to go for therapy and they don't have time for it, what can I do for them? What can I advise them? How can you mentioned exercise, go for a walk, but what other things that I can do to help them when I'm not a therapist, when I'm not a specialist?
So some other methods you could do is, there's so many methods, like asking them to even journal, right? If they don't want to talk to you, right, and they're like, you wouldn't understand where I'm coming from, I feel too ashamed to share these thoughts and feelings. Okay, that's okay, I respect that. Can you just journal about these? Can you engage in spirituality? Can you talk to God about it? Can you pray about it? These are some options that they can also engage in that you can recommend for them.
Any specific one for a teenager? It's and let's not be oblivious about it. You have your son or your daughter who come home and they're crying. Either they're getting bullied at school, or maybe they loved someone and that someone decided not to love them back, or something like that. And now they are in sad situation, and they don't want to talk, they want to isolate themselves, they're getting angry. Is there any specific thing for teenagers or young college students, if they're facing crisis, what to tell them as parents, as siblings?
Honestly, normalizing it. I think we even started this conversation with saying that crisis is something that everybody experiences and it's normal. So if you know the topic, right? Let's say you know that they had a fallout with a friend or with a partner. Being able to normalize that situation, thinking about, did I ever experience that, or did I have anybody in my life who has experienced that I can then present this to my child to remind them that they're not the only one in the situation will pass.
So normalizing it means belittling it, making it normal?
No. So normalizing meaning that they're not the only person who's experienced that situation, and that you too see where they're at. You too have experienced those emotions. You too have felt that pain, and therefore you know how to connect to them.
So telling them, oh, this is normal, this is part of life, don't make a big deal about it, is not the right thing to say.
That's not the right thing to do. So something that I might do and have done in the past is saying like, oh yeah, like let's say it's an exam, right? Again, failing an exam. I failed an exam before. I thought chemistry was super difficult. I struggled in that subject so much. So in that moment, that person who's opposite of me might say, oh, wait, hold on. Am I not the only one feeling this way? I thought it was just me, but it sounds like it's not.
It's an opportunity for parents to start admitting things to their children. You know what? Parents keep telling their children, I was the A student, I was the best of my class. Now the moment to admit, it's like, you know what? I did fail one class, or I did do that. So take that opportunity to connect with your teenage son or daughter or college student when admitting some of these things, right?
Yes, and that's a really important one for our teenagers, because what I've seen a lot in our community, and just in most communities, children put a lot of pressure on themselves, and they feel like there's also a lot of pressure from families in regards to grades. So this is something that I was seeing during the pandemic, is getting into colleges, but there was so much isolation during the pandemic, and students had to change the way they were learning. They went from, being in a classroom to now learning via computers. And so grades start coming down. They start having more anxiety, and then they started thinking, oh my God, I might not get into this college, and now I'm ashamed to my family. And then the depression would come in, and the anxiety would come in, and the suicidal thoughts would come in. And so being able to connect to your child and tell them a story about the time you didn't do well in school, or maybe just your perspective about how they're doing right now in the moment, and normalizing that it is difficult because learning has changed and we're in a situation that most people had not experienced before, is so helpful for that child.
Okay. So now let's get into the serious part of the topic. Someone going through a crisis, they start getting suicidal thoughts, or a family member who died from suicide, or the suicide itself is the crisis. So how do we look at it as a community? So first of all, it's important for us to understand the religious point of view when it comes to suicide. A lot of people have a misunderstanding about suicide, because what happens is, if someone dies from suicide, most of the times parents will hide it. They will not come and tell everybody, right? It's a shameful thing. Some people, you ask them why, they say because if we say, they're not going to pray janazah on them. I don't know if you heard that before. Where does that come from? Is if someone dies from suicide, are we not supposed to pray janazah on them? Are we not supposed to bury them? Is that something part of Islam? Absolutely not. It's very important for us to understand. Committing suicide is haram. Dying from suicide is a different story. What does that mean? There are people who have no mental health problems whatsoever, and they kill themselves they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want to have a scandal. Someone embezzled money. A politician embezzled money, got caught. Now he's going to go to court. He's going to embarrass the family. So what does he do? He kills himself. That's committing suicide. That's a sin. And Allah, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever kills himself with that way, intentionally, knowing what they're doing, on the day of judgment, they will be punished constantly with the same way of death. Someone is losing his business, right? And he has a life insurance policy for $10 million. So he said, you know what? Instead of me living and my family live in poverty, let me kill myself so they get the money and they live with it. That's committing suicide. Someone got caught cheating on their spouse. They don't want the scandal. They kill themselves. Someone is going through disease, or they know they're going to go through this and this is going to be painful. They don't want to handle the pain, so they kill themselves. A man in the days of the Prophet ﷺ got wounded in a battle, but it was so painful. He said he doesn't want to deal with the pain, so he stabbed himself with the sword and he died. The Prophet ﷺ said he's going to fire. So these kinds of people who have no mental health problems whatsoever, no psychological issues, they're committing suicide. those are the ones that's considered committing a sin. Now, where did the janazah ruling comes from? The man who committed suicide in the days of the Prophet ﷺ, the Prophet refused to pray janazah on him. But the community did pray janazah on him. There was a janazah prayer, there was a burial, but the Prophet ﷺ said, I don't want to pray on him. To discourage people from doing it to themselves. Right? But you're not the Prophet, I'm not the Prophet, to say I'm not going to pray on that person. If we know someone dies from suicide, we still have to pray janazah on them. Okay? So that's someone committing suicide. Now, someone dying from suicide is a completely different situation. What does that mean? Someone have a mental issue or a psychological problem, either depression, anxiety, bipolar, whatever it is that we'll hear it from Dr. Lamba right now, and they end up killing themselves. Allah is fair. Allah is adil. Allah is not going to punish somebody who died from suicide because they have some disturbances or some malfunction in their brain. Allah is fair, Allah is knowledgeable, Allah is wise. We know that already. So now we're not talking necessarily about the first group, the ones who commit suicide, fully aware of what they're doing. We're talking about the person who dies from suicide because they have a mental behavioral problem. So let us talk about this. How does it start? What are the signs of it? What do you like the community to know about the medical situation that could cause someone to die from suicide?
So to begin with, suicide is the 11th leading cause of death in the U.S. And every 11 minutes, one person dies by suicide in America.
And some of them are Muslims, by the way.
Yes, definitely. So you were saying, what are some, signs that we can see? Some signs are, the signs can vary between people. So some signs can be somebody sleeping a lot. You'll see people that'll go for 16 hours, 18 hours of sleep. They don't want to leave their room. They won't shower for days at a time. You'll see that their appetite has changed. If this is somebody who tends to eat a lot and enjoys food, you'll see them not wanting to eat anymore. They don't want to engage with the family anymore. They don't want to sit at dinner or lunch with family anymore. They used to enjoy hobbies like soccer and basketball, and now you see them isolating themselves. You see them withdrawing themselves from those activities and not partaking in those activities anymore. One of the biggest visual factors of an individual who has thoughts of suicide is self-harm. So you might see some individuals who are cutting themselves. You'll see scars on their arms, on their legs, sometimes even on their necks. They will even journal about suicidal thoughts. They will listen to music that has suicidal words in them. Sometimes they'll even watch movies that are having a common theme of just kind of suicidality in it.
And that's for any age or just simply teenagers and young people?
So for any age.
Any age.
Yeah. What we have seen in research actually is women attempt to die by suicide more, so they just attempt, but men are 4 times more successful to die by suicide. And the population that we see, there's 2 populations that we see that tend to be successful, and those populations are actually individuals who identify as LGBTQ, and then individuals who are elderly. So individuals who are typically above the age of 70, and these are individuals who are experiencing a lot of loneliness, a lot of isolation. These are individuals who may have lost their partner and are experiencing a lot of grief.
Any signs of the tools or the methods of suicide that parents should be alert if they see it with their children?
So when I work with children and I go out, so I used to go out and do crisis assessments and assess children in hospitals and schools, at homes, for suicidal ideation. What I would see the most with children is they look for medication. They are very aware of where medication is kept in the house, and they will either hide a bottle or they'll take a couple pills and hide those pills under their beds, in their drawers, under the bed. So medication is the number one thing. I've seen children even use vitamins and hiding vitamins and attempting to overdose on vitamins. cleaning products, bleach. I've had children attempting to drink bleach and attempting to end their lives. Definitely knives and razors in the shower are things they've tried to use as well. The list goes on. Belts, scarves.
So it does get really sad to start hearing about more details of that. If a parent sees that in their child and they start blaming themselves, what would you tell them?
I think that's always a parent's first reaction, right? It's always, what did I do to cause my child to feel this way? And a lot of times, children don't actually speak out about their suicidal thoughts because they're afraid that if they say anything, the parent will blame themselves. Majority of times, children are going through other experiences. It's typically not related to the family, especially in today's world. We see so much bullying at school.
Bullying.
Yes. And most of the time, children don't come home and talk about their experiences of being bullied because they're ashamed. They're ashamed of sharing the information that was used to label them at school. Some children are afraid that their parents are going to go to school and embarrass them more.
Okay. If someone dies from suicide, now what? What do you advise that parents or spouse would do if their family members, their parents, their children dies from suicide? What would you tell a family member who went through that?
So I would definitely recommend counseling. So
Any
kind of death causes grief, right? And there's short grief and there's prolonged grief. And the prolonged grief is the kind of grief that we get really concerned about because these are the individuals that we then see also have depression, also start having thoughts of suicidal ideation. And so specifically grief therapy is what we would recommend, whether the individuals want to do it on their own or they want to come in as a family and process the grief together.
Okay. And is it better for them to stay around people or take some time off from society and be on their own?
So it really depends on the situation, right? If this individual is uncontrollably sobbing and unable to function in society, that person might just need to step away from society for a short bit, work on themselves with a therapist, kind of understand what is triggering them within the society, and then the therapist and that individual work together in helping them come back to society, learn coping skills that they can engage in, whether that's, okay, I need to, before I step into this event, work on some deep breathing, talk to a friend and ask them to be there to be my support system at this event. So we can work on different kind of coping skills to help that person be reintegrated into society. The goal is never to completely isolate the individual from the society because that could make the symptoms even worse.
Okay. So maybe one more or a couple more questions and then we'll open it for the audience to ask the questions. What do we do about the stigma of suicide in our community? I mean, maybe in our community it's devastating if a family member dies from suicide, but we will not talk about it. We will hide it. Is it better to hide it or is it better not to hide it? And if there's any benefit that this information is known to others, what do you think?
I definitely think it's better not to hide it. So
it's better not to hide it.
Not to hide it. And this is the reason why we're doing this, right? Is we're raising awareness that suicide happens in our community too. I think there's this myth that our community doesn't have suicide, right? But that's such a myth. When I went out and did those assessments, I would see so many Muslim families. I would see so many Muslim children. And so a big part of understanding suicide, knowing how to respond to suicidal ideation when your child says, I'm having suicidal thoughts, is coming to these kind of workshops and educating yourself of understanding how to respond when your child says, hey mom, hey dad, I don't want to live anymore. I just want to go to sleep and never wake up anymore. So instead of getting angry and shutting that conversation or saying, well, when I was your age, my life was so much harder. What do you have to complain about? Replacing that with, well, tell me more. What's happening? What's making you sad?
So when a family goes through that and they talk about it, it will maybe save someone else's child, right?
Yes.
Because if God forbid something happens like this to me and I come and tell you, hey, this is what I was not aware of. I saw these signs. If you see it in your child, make sure you pay attention to it. Yeah. That's a benefit, right?
Yeah. And there's this myth that if I ask someone about suicide or suicidal thoughts, I'm going to plant this idea in their mind. And that's a very large myth, because most individuals who are thinking about suicide or have attempted suicide, it doesn't happen overnight. They are planning this out. They have thought about this idea for so long that it becomes easier for them to act upon it. And so when you bring up this conversation or when you talk about it, you actually open the door to these thoughts that they've been experiencing for weeks or months.
Okay. So, of course, as we said in every single session of those, we are putting both words together, the word of our religion and spirituality, and the word of science and medicine and psychology. We cannot just deal with these situations with only one. If we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect our children, we take them to the masjid, we make sure that they are spiritually nourished and fulfilled. But at the same time, if God forbid they're going through depression or anxiety or getting bullied at school, let's make sure that we get counseling or therapy and talk to someone who knows what they're talking about. Because telling someone, say astaghfirullah, don't kill yourself, it's haram, it's not gonna do anything, especially for someone who is having any depression or mental problem or psychological.
Yeah, and somebody who's overwhelmed. Sometimes individuals will ask me, like, how young of individuals do you see struggling with suicidality? And I remember one of my cases, the child was as young as 5 years old. Yeah. And she was growing up in a home where there was a lot of domestic violence, a lot of abuse, and she was hearing languages and seeing behaviors that a child should not be seeing. And when I went to go and assess her, she knew the methods. And she said, no, I don't want to live anymore. I don't want to see mommy getting hit anymore. And when I said, well, how would you hurt yourself? Have you thought about it? She knew where the knives were. She knew how to get them. She knew when to do it. She knew when people would go to sleep. She had made drawings. So it was something that she had thought about for a really long time and planned out.
Yeah. There is a nice dua that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, and we should teach it to our children all the time, right? If someone is going through these thoughts, the Prophet ﷺ was asked, can we wish to die? Can we have the desire to die? The Prophet ﷺ gave a very nice advice, and he said, if you ever have these thoughts in your mind, what do you say? Anyone knows? Anyone knows the dua? No. The dua is if someone has any thoughts or wishes that I wish I can die, I wish I'm over. The dua is Allahumma ahyini ma damat al-hayatu khayran li wa amitni ma dama al-mawtu khayran. Oh Allah, let me live if life is good for me, and let me die if death is good for me. Let me live if life is better for me, and let me die if death is better for me. What a powerful dua. That whenever you feel that that's it, you're giving up, life is so difficult, you cannot take it anymore, you cannot handle it anymore, your parents are fighting all the time, your boss is giving you a hard time, financially, the dua is, oh Allah, let me live as long life is better for me, and let me die if death is better for me. That's a powerful dua that we all should teach it to our children, remind ourselves about it, because no one is immune from these thoughts. Even if someone's not gonna do suicide or commit suicide, at least people would think, life is so difficult, I cannot handle it anymore, I cannot do this anymore. All right, any last things before we open it for question about the crisis or about the topic of suicide in general?
So I also want to reiterate that our elders are also struggling with this, and it's not just our children, because our elders are the biggest population who are dying by suicide as well. So it's make sure you're checking in on your elders. Make sure that if you have somebody in your community that has had somebody who's passed away in their family, a spouse, a partner, that you're checking in on them. Another part I do want to mention is don't be afraid of taking your child, your loved one, to the hospital for assessments. Again, when I was doing this work, I experienced families feeling a lot of shame around seeking help for their child or for their loved one. It's always better to seek help, even if that's your child getting hospitalized, than having a dead child. So please make sure that you're reaching out for help if you see signs and symptoms, or if your child comes forward and says, Mom, Dad, I just don't want to live anymore. I want to end my life.
All right. Thank you very much. Let's open it for questions. So if you have any questions, we'll start with you. Just say it loud, and I'll try to repeat it for the recording. Go ahead. So we are doing that. Qazizada Foundation, Dr. Lamba and Dr. Wali are both therapists and counselors who are doing a great job to serve the community. A few months ago, we established something called the Muslim Mental Health Professionals Coalition, which has all the Muslim mental health professionals, behavioral health professionals in Southern California in one group, communication group. They meet once a month, and whenever we need help, we right away direct to them. Like in the past 4 or 5 weeks, we had major problems with students on campus, Muslim students on campus, right? They're being afraid, anxious, they've been bullied, harassed. And the other side is depleting all the resources of the universities. So what we did is we connected the MSA West with the Mental Health Professional Coalition, and we said hopefully they can provide services to the students. So yes, thank you very much. There is the self-assisted suicide. That's a different story. When someone goes, they give them a pill to die, right? But the other people who are on life support machines and they choose to take it off and then just die on their own, each case has to be discussed separately. I get these questions all the time. I get people asking me, my father, my mother, they're on life support. If we take the plug, is that suicide? If they told us to take the plug, is that considered suicide? There are certain situations that removing the plug or removing the machine or life support is not considered suicide or killing or murder. That's when there's no hope in that person to survive or live. People who cannot live at all without them, and they have to be under sedation because the tube is all the way in, and if they are awake, it will be very painful, and if they take it out. So that situation, it's okay to remove the machines and the life support. But there are certain situations, if just simply someone says it's too much pain, I want to die, I don't want to, then that is when there's questionable situation, when then that patience and perseverance is tested right now, and no one should ask to die just because they don't want to be in pain. I'll repeat the question for the recording. So a very good comment that in some cultures, some parents will say things that will push their children to think suicidal. For example, if the child is having marital problems, they will say, I'd rather my child die and not have a divorce. And that's definitely one of the worst things that you can say to your daughter or your son if they're going through a divorce. So what are the questions, what are the things that we should do or say when we see someone saying that to their child, or someone is going through marital problems, so we can avoid having them suicidal thoughts?
I think I'm almost touching on a Islamic perspective, so you might have to jump into this one. I think there's a reason why we have the word divorce in our faith, right? So I think those parents need to be reminded of that, because what they're doing in that moment is they're shaming their child. Dr. Soboh used a really good word earlier on when I said normalizing, and you said, you mean belittling? And I said, no, not belittling. And so that's what we're experiencing with these parents, right? They're belittling their child. They're not hearing their child. They're so caught up in their own emotions and the notion of what is the society going to say, that they're completely forgetting my child is going through pain. Am I even listening am I asking questions? Am I listening to what my child is going through within the home? as a friend, yeah, you can educate them. As a friend, you can be there for them. A lot of times these individuals feel like they're a burden to others because their families are telling them you're being a burden. So one of the best things you can do is you can actually point that out and let them know, hey, you can always talk to me. I will never experience you as a burden. Sometimes even being able to connect and say, my other friends had these situations in their life too, to normalize it for them. Even if you don't have friends that have experienced that, being able to just kind of create that connection for them to understand, oh, I'm not the only one. Connecting them to other individuals who have been through divorce, connecting them to their local imams who can provide guidance. If they're experiencing any kind of violence, connecting them to like domestic violence shelters, because there's a lot of individuals in those shelters who have been through these experiences who can provide more guidance for them and a sense of safety, so they're not making any kind of decisions that can make their life more unsafe within that home.
That's a good thing. I don't know if you got the answer. If you know someone going through that, just tell them, hey, I know your mom maybe is busy, she's not able, I can listen to you, I can talk to you. Maybe she doesn't mean it that way, of course, you're going to tell. She doesn't mean it that way, she doesn't mean that she wants a child, etc. But we need, as a community, to get over the idea of divorce, right? We need to get over the stigma of divorce. We say if someone's divorced, no one's going to get married afterwards. Some parents would say, I'd rather my children go do the haram instead of getting married and get a divorce. And so that is something we need all as a community to start changing how we look at divorce. Divorce, yes, it's a sad solution. I call it a solution for a problem that's taking place, and they're not supposed to keep beating up each other for the rest of their lives. So I want us to understand something. What we've seen now from younger generation, that they're getting divorced very easily, too easily, right? They're getting divorced like they had a toy, they got sick of it, okay, let's get a divorce, right? Because they've been raised up in the electronics and the low attention span and all that. So we don't want people to take divorce easily and lightly, just because they have a simple argument, I'm getting divorced, right? A guy divorced his wife, a young couple, after 6 months because she did not make him a cup of tea. All right? See how silly is that, right? But at the same time, divorce is a solution for very difficult situations. I tell, when I get questions from a sister who's been beaten up, abused physically by her husband, it's like, you need to get a divorce. You cannot stay in that relationship. This is a time I encourage her to get a divorce, right? Getting a black eye once a week or getting cuts every. So this is a situation that is not acceptable at all. It's harmful for the kids to see that as well, right? Boys will start doing like their dads. Girls will be accepting this. So this is a situation that we should not tolerate and say it's okay. Like a difference between cultures. So the question is, immigrants, parents who are raising up children born here, coming from different cultures, does that gap between cultures create any mental or psychological problems for the children? Or behavioral, something like that?
That's such a tricky question, because yes, you could say yes for some, depending on how you're raising your children, how you're communicating to your children, what kind of emotions you're role modeling for your children, right? So if you're somebody who's very connected with your emotions and somebody passes away, if you can show grief to your child, if you can cry and show sadness, no, you're teaching your child very healthy skills. But if you come from a culture where any kind of sadness gets translated to anger, and then your child starts feeling anxious around you because, oh my God, dad's always angry and I get scared, now I'm hiding in the closet, yeah, that can impact their mental health. So that's a very tricky question. I think it depends on, one, the kind of culture you grew up in, but also whether or not you were allowed to express healthy emotions and how your own mindset is in that moment as well. So it's not a yes or no. I think it depends on a case scenario.
And I don't like it when youth blame that. Oh, me and my mom don't get along because she's an immigrant and I'm born and raised. You know what? There is an age gap. Even American moms born and raised here, they have problems with their American kids born and raised here, right? It's normal to have misunderstanding, but I don't want us to put so much weight on that, right? And make it as an excuse or something to hang our not ability to we don't want to work hard to fix that relationship. Even if it does cause problems, it brings a lot of goodness, right? Immigrant parents teach their children a lot of things that American parents cannot teach. in my opinion, right?
They make their children very resilient, is what I'll say.
That too, resilient, sensitive, have sympathy towards other, have an understanding of humanity at large, not just living in a bubble and all that, right? So there's a lot of good things that immigrant parents can give their parents, their children. Yes, there are things that they cannot, especially when it comes to school. If they did not go to school here, they don't know the things that takes place at school. They don't know what's bullying, how painful it is in middle school here. They don't know how, there are certain things that they might not understand, but everything inshallah worked out. If they can talk about it, they will work it out. I've seen amazing, amazing children who are born and raised here, and their parents are immigrants. They taught them so well. So, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much for attending. And this concludes our series of talks about mental health therapy and how we related it to from an Islamic perspective. Jazakumullah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Dr. Lamba.